Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would talk about the very interesting matchup and the very great matchup. Not necessarily the greatest in terms of skills that I've ever personally seen out of a boxing match from either fighter, but certainly a very entertaining fight nonetheless. And some people may even consider this a little bit of an upset if I was more than likely going to guess who more than likely was going to be the favorite to win this fight, I probably would have bet on that of Mr. Oscar Valdez, at least in most people's minds, and not really looking at either fighter too much before this fight. That's why I didn't really do a fight prediction because I did not know that either of these fights were happening until about a couple days ago. And I usually like to at least watch for 1 to 2 weeks in terms of certain fights to really get a fight prediction going. But anyway. Anyways, overall, for those of you that did not end up hearing about the news, Mr. Emanuel Navarrete, I believe is his name, the two Mexican boxers that went at it today, Mr. Emanuel Navarrete and Mr. Oscar Valdez. Oscar Valdez, of course, he ended up losing by that of unanimous decision. The scorecards, I believe, were a little bit mixed. I think one had it 8 rounds to 4. Another one, I think, had it about maybe probably 10 rounds to 2. Another one maybe may have even been 12 rounds to 0. I can't necessarily remember. There was two very wide ones and one that was about 8 rounds to 4. But I do have to agree with the scorecards. And as you see here by the face of Mr. Oscar Valdez, he did take a little bit of a beating in some of the rounds in this fight. And this just goes to show you, even with certain talents that a certain boxer or that a certain athlete may have, there are certain things that they may not have in particular, even against a guy that looks less talented than them, that may end up winning them the fight. And Oscar Valdez in this fight, in my personal view, he did somewhat end up getting exposed in this fight. And I'm not a person that, likes to say that every fighter ends up getting quote unquote exposed in every single fight. But every fight that you do lose, it will somewhat expose some of your inefficiencies or your deficiencies within that of your fight game. What did we learn about Oscar Valdez tonight? We learned that he's a guy that likes to lead with the hook a lot of the times. And I don't care who you are, whether you're in MMA or boxing, but especially in boxing, you cannot lead with a hook the way that Oscar Valdez did in this fight, at least from left field, as what he did. Now, he still landed a lot of good hooks in this fight, but Oscar Valdez really had no major plan B in this fight. He thought that Mr. Emanuel Navarrete, that he was just going to run straight into his punches and that he was going to try to brawl with him, and that Oscar Valdez, just like against Miguel Berchelt, that he was just going to basically be able to fight on the back foot and pretty much hit him with left and right hooks, hit him with the jab here and there, tie him up here and there, and pretty much outbox his way to victory. That's not what ended up happening at all, because Emmanuel Navarrete, even though he's very awkward as a fighter, he's not a guy that has great footwork. His feet are a little bit clunky. He's a guy that, he didn't show horrible head movement in this fight, but he doesn't have the best of head movement. His defense isn't necessarily a plus, but his defense, at least, when he needed it, it was there. And on top of it, Emmanuel Navarrete, he did have certain athletic advantages over that of Mr. Oscar Valdez. He had a great chin, possibly even a better chin than that of Oscar Valdez. He had excellent stamina within this fight. For those of you that did not know the statistics, Mr. Emmanuel Navarrete, he ended up throwing, I believe, over 1,000 punches in this fight. Even for the elite of the elite fighters, that's a pretty rare feat usually to do. Even in the biggest of fights, or even in the best of performances, at times maybe you'll see 500 punches thrown. At least from what I remember, over 1,000 punches thrown is quite the amount of punches overall, at least to my recollection. But he showed a better gas tank. He showed a little bit of a better chin than that of Oscar Valdez. But on top of that, he also showed that he just had the better game plan. He had a way better jab than that of Oscar Valdez in this fight. He had more nuance to that of his boxing game and more of that to his boxing ability. I believe that he had a 6 or 5 inch reach advantage from what I heard over that of Oscar Valdez. And Oscar Valdez, what he was supposed to do was that he was supposed to use his feet, use his jab, use his allegedly superior defense against Emmanuel Navarrete, and he was supposed to be able to move in and outside of range, make Navarrete run into his counters, and not lead with those bullshit hooks that he ended up doing all night. Another fighter that recently did this in a fight was Mr. Errol Spence Jr. Now, the reason after a while, why Errol Spence Jr. led with hooks, and at times he does, but the reason why he led with hooks from way out of left field against Terrence Bud Crawford is because eventually he just knew that there was going to be no other punches that he could land. Oscar Valdez, it seemed like his boxing IQ within this fight, it got majorly exposed. Because if you actually take a look at some of the other fights, he does have a problem with a very good jab. He does have a problem with a guy that can fight a little bit on the outside and keep him off of bay. And when you fight a fighter that knows how to do that, and on top of that is a very good athlete like that of an Emanuel Navarrete, you're gonna have a lot of problems. The guy had a 5 to 6 inch reach advantage over you. On top of that, the power level. Oscar probably had more power, but Emanuel Navarrete, he had enough to compete with that of Mr. Oscar Valdez. On top of that, he had the better jab or the more consistent jab, and he just had more types of combinations. I mean, it's no offense against Oscar Valdez, but I think I've seen him throw about maybe 5 to 10 jabs the whole entire fight. The majority of the punches were basically just hooks thrown out of left field. You don't win a fight like that against elite level fighters. And I wouldn't necessarily call Navarrete, in my personal view, someone that I would say is quote unquote elite, but he did show that he had more nuance and that he had a little bit more variety within his boxing game because he attacked to the body more than what Oscar Valdez did. He was able to move at certain angles better than what Oscar Valdez did. Now, is he necessarily, as crisp with some of the things that he does as Oscar Valdez? Does he have the footwork? Does he have quite the head movement? Does he have overall, the the defense at times? No, but at the end of the day, once again, he had more variance and more nuance in that of his boxing combos and his boxing attacks. And that's what happens when you have very little nuance within that of your boxing game. I'm not sure if Oscar Valdez just heavily underestimated Navarrete, but I'm not really sure if I can even say that because Oscar Valdez knows that this was going to be a very big win in his career if he was able to get this. He had already lost to Shakur Stevenson not too long ago. And of course, the Mexican versus Mexican, kind of proposition of this fight, it was supposed to be very big for both of them. Now, who knows? Maybe Oscar Valdez, maybe he did not believe overall that Navarrete was going to be on his same level. But at the end of the day, he wasn't on his same level because Navarrete proved to be better than that of Oscar Valdez. Now, once again, does he have quite the head movement? Does he have, quite that of the footwork of Mr. Oscar Valdez? Does he have, the straight punching of that of Oscar Valdez or the crisp punching? No, he doesn't. But what does it matter for if you're going to have very one-dimensional attacks the whole entire time? As for Mr. Emanuel Navarrete, he did prove that he was the better fighter in this fight, or at least a smarter fighter between the two when it came down to it. But he also has a lot of deficiencies as well. A lot of his punches are thrown very sloppy at times. They're not necessarily quite as bad as what, the Diaz brothers would throw in that of the UFC or something like that, but they are a little bit at times from left field or they're a little bit sloppy. His punches don't always come straight out and straight back. But one thing I do have to give him credit for, one punch that he knew that Oscar was going to try to land, and he did land it still quite a bit in this fight, that left hook, that vicious left hook that Oscar Valdez has. Emanuel Navarrete kept his right hand up basically the whole entire time. When he would throw, a left jab, his right hand would be right up there to protect the right side of his face to make sure that that left hook would not always get through. If he would throw a right hand, he would bring it usually right back, or at least at times. Once again, his hands don't always return back when they need to. Oscar Valdez, his hands usually return a little bit better, but his high guard also blinded him a little bit more. And the high guard can be good to use, but if you use it so much to the point to where you really have no extra measures of attack when it comes down to it, or you have no parries, you have no counters when it comes down to it, it can be used against you. If you use it way too much, it can blind you a little bit, and certain punches can get around the guard. That's why Navarrete, he was able to get certain uppercuts, he was able to get certain punches, especially hooks down to the body, and he was able to maneuver a lot of the times Oscar Valdez into certain punches. And you see the results on his face right there. So like I said, a very interesting fight. This will be remembered as one of the better Mexican fights probably within the past 10 plus years. In my view, was it between two exceptionally skilled fighters? No. When you talk about two great Mexican fighters that were exceptionally skilled fighters, at least for their weight division, and these two were promoting it, I think of Marco Antonio Barrera and Eric Morales, and there's probably a few others that I'm not personally remembering at the moment, but those two fighters actually had certain exceptional skills. They had very good skills. For those of you that remember Marco Antonio Barrera, he was the first and the only one to defeat Prince Nassim Hamed. And Hamed was eventually going to get defeated, in my view, eventually, because Prince Nassim Hamed, he was a guy that had never kept his hands up. His chin a lot of the times would be kind of wide open in the air. He relied so much on his athleticism at the end of the day that eventually, he just was not able to get away with it. And Marco Antonio Barrera, he was able to use the angles and his crisp jab very well, and his inside counter work very well against Prince Nassim Hamed. I don't think that either of these fighters are anywhere near close to what Marco Antonio Barrera actually was for his weight divisions. Now, Marco Antonio Barrera, of course, still lost some fights. I believe that he lost to a fighter named Junior Jones. If I'm wrong about that, someone correct me. Some black fighter, I believe, at the 135 pound or whatever that weight division was that he fought at. Of course, he lost 2 times very dominantly to Manny Pacquiao. He lost 1 time to Eric Morales. But Marco Antonio Barrera did have a great amount of skill. No doubt about it. I don't know if either of these fighters, I would say, has a great amount of skill. Now, both of them are particularly skilled, but neither of them, in my view, are clear A-grade fighters. And after this fight, Oscar Valdez has showed himself, in my view, that he clearly was never an A-grade fighter in the first place. Now, who knows? Maybe he's not the same fighter that he once was. But to be honest with you, he also had very similar issues against Robson Conceição. He had very similar issues against Shakur Stevenson and even against other fighters within his career. So I'm not really sure if I can claim that this was a different Oscar Valdez or if this was just the same Oscar Valdez, but these deficiencies that they just got even more exposed because of the type of fighter that he fought. So it is what it is. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for this video. I just thought that I would talk about that. What did I personally score the fight? I think I scored the fight about 8 rounds to 4, 9 rounds to 3 for Emanuel Navarrete. I thought that he clearly won the fight. ESPN was trying to make it sound like it was a little bit closer than what it actually was. No, it wasn't that particularly close. And, I like Oscar. He seems like a decent dude, at least, possibly. But at the end of the day, no. Oscar's going to have to go back to the drawing board and really try to work on his offensive game. But, to be quite honest with you, I just don't think Oscar Valdez, I don't think that he's ever going to be on that level. After this fight, he really showed you how truly one-dimensional of a fighter he actually is. Now, he is very talented. He's a very talented athlete, and, he's a talented counterpuncher, especially with his hooks. But at the end of the day, it's like, he basically looked like a slightly better version of, Isaac Pitbull Cruz in there. So it's like what really is the point overall, of getting into these big fights if you're going to be that one-dimensional? It just is what it is. Anyways, but that's pretty much about it for the video. Let me also state this, because I always see a lot of these channels, or these people especially. For those of you that have known my channel for a while, you know that I like to review Boxing Eagle or Dante's Boxing Nation or a lot of these other LDBC and new media channels. And certain people always ask me, why do you review their channel so much specifically and possibly not some other ones? Well, they're mainly the main popular channels, and they're usually the ones that put out the most narratives that I see. And on top of that, those guys are the biggest hypocrites within that of the whole entire boxing media. I see a lot of these guys. I've seen Boxing Ego say overall that Oscar Valdez, that he got pieced up and all this sort of stuff, that he got exposed and all this sort of stuff. And, to a degree, I agree. But what I am going to say is this. A lot of these guys, especially with the LDBC and new media, a big part of the reason of what makes them hypocritical is that they always love to talk shit on certain fighters like Canelo Alvarez or Oscar Valdez, Tyson Fury, Alexander Usyk, or Naoya in a way, or Vasily Lomachenko. But basically, what am I saying? Basically, any fighter that's not an American black fighter, when it comes down to it, they love to talk all this shit about, how they're overrated and how they're big white hypes, or they're just promoted by the media. even at times when these certain fighters have results, and then when they take a loss, they love to post these memes about them crying, or they love to say that they got punked, or overall that, see, we told you they were overrated the whole entire time. But then when one of their fighters loses, like Stephon Fulton or Deontay Wilder or Errol Spence Jr., like Boxing Eagle just last week, I believe, posted a live video for about 3 hours and was on his menstrual cycle, was on his period, and basically crying overall about how people were disrespecting Errol Spence Jr. Listen, dude, at the end of the day, when you disrespect certain fighters like Terrence Crawford or other fighters that other people tend to like, and don't get me wrong, it is not good to be a fanboy at the end of the day. But when you tend to put that energy out, there's a saying that goes around, the energy you put out is the energy you're going to get right back. And when you talk a lot of shit on these fighters and say that they're overrated and that overall they got exposed and, they were only hyped up because of this and this, and don't get me wrong, sometimes that might be the slight truth. There's no problem with being logical and stating overall, the evidence. But a big part of the reason why so many people clap back so hard at Dante's Box Nation and Boxing Ego is because they see that they very clearly have a racial issue and a racial agenda, and that they're very biased. They're very hypocritical. That's why a lot of the times, just like how they like to see a lot of the racist fans, embarrassed, they like to see those guys embarrassed because they love to once again embarrass certain fighters like Valdez or Tyson Fury or other fighters that they don't like, especially the ones that don't have the complexion for their protection. But then when it comes to Deontay Wilder or Spence or Fulton, they say, well, why are you hating? It's just so sad that, these boxers are hated on and blah, blah, blah. Listen, dude, at the end of the day, if you're putting out that energy about other fighters, you're going to get it right back. And me, myself, I'm a very harsh and logical critic. So a lot of the stuff that I say is probably going to come across as harsh. But I'm not this dude overall that picks sides. I'm not a guy that overall is going to be more harsher to another guy just because I like this guy more than the other. At the end of the day, if I think that you got exposed to certain deficiencies, I am going to say it. It just is what it is. It doesn't matter who the fighter is. And Oscar Valdez in this fight, he did get showed with a certain amount of his deficiencies. It just is what it is. Doesn't mean that he doesn't have a lot of heart. Does not mean that he's not a very good fighter. But is he an A-grade level fighter after this fight? I just don't see how it's possible. Now, as for Emanuel Navarrete, where would I like to see him go next? And then Mr. Oscar Valdez, pretty much for the last point of the video. For Mr. Emanuel Navarrete, it is going to be very interesting. I don't really know where he's going to go from here because I believe he's at 130 pounds. Maybe he can fight someone like that of Gary Russell Jr. Maybe he can fight, I don't know who else might be there. Possibly another big fight with Leo Santa Cruz. Maybe these two are going to have a rematch. They were trying to push very hard for a rematch, but a lot of people, I'm not really sure if they're going to be super interested in a rematch. Of course, it was a great little brawl in certain rounds, but I thought that the fight was clearly won by Navarrete, either 9 rounds to 3 or 8 rounds to 4, and that was pretty much the max amount of rounds that you could give to Mr. Oscar Valdez. So it is what it is. But, if he fights another fighter, it'd be very interesting to see what else he can do with the 130-pound weight division. I'm not really sure who else has the belts there because I don't think Shakur Stevenson fights there anymore at the moment. I think he's trying to go up to 135. Maybe he can get Isaac Pitbull Cruz on the ring. That'd be a very interesting fight. Maybe there's some other fights that can happen. Who knows? Ryan Garcia, but of course Ryan, he fights at 140, so I doubt it. I don't know. We'll see what happens. George Kambosos, that'd be an interesting fight. One of those fights. As for Oscar Valdez, he's going to have to really think about going to the drawing board. He might even have to get a different coach in his corner. And it's not that, what's his name? Reynoso, Eddie Reynoso, also known as Saul Canelo Alvarez's trainer. It's not that he's not a good trainer because I've heard him give Canelo a lot of great advice. But at the end of the day, he just might not be the proper fit for you. All right, it is what it is. This is also going to be my last point pretty much, but it just goes to show you how great both fighters actually have to be in a super fight of that magnitude for it really to be that competitive usually. Because actually when we talk about just in terms of pure skill set, what the most competitive super fight has been probably the past 10 plus years, it probably has been between that of Canelo Alvarez and Gennady Golovkin. It shows you overall the level of those two fighters overall, that they were able to give each other hell in both of those fights. I don't think a lot of people, especially from the LDBC and new media, like to admit or realize how skilled Canelo is. And Oscar, if he was, in my view, anywhere near as skilled as what Canelo was, he would have used his feet a lot more in this fight, established distance, not been leading with the hook. And that's the difference between someone that is just a, good Mexican champion like Oscar Valdez and an all-time great Mexican champion like that of Canelo Alvarez. Canelo truly sets a different level of standard. And if you know boxing, then you know what he brings to the table. But other fighters like Oscar Valdez and Leo Santa Cruz and other guys like that, they're very good champions, but they're not great. It is what it is. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.